This is Figma's auto layout. According to Figma, auto layout is a property you can add to frames and components. It lets you create designs that grow to fill or shrink to fit and reflow as their contents change. I know, not so helpful. But what does that really mean though? Well, it means that you could go from this to this. And instead of doing this, you can now do this. And you could go from this to this. And there is so much more that you can do. It's one of Figma's most useful but yet most confusing tools to use. Especially with Figma's newest update, a few more necessary but yet more complex features were added to auto layouts. In this tutorial, we're going to learn what auto layouts are and how they work through a few different examples. Welcome to the tutorial. So this is the Figma file that you can find down in the descriptions below, right below the like button. The first thing that I want you guys to do is to come up over here and duplicate this into your own Figma file. That way you can actually edit the same file. So once you do that, you have access to all of these pages over here. The finished file will look a little bit different to mine. This is going to have the actual finished auto layout designs over here. And within assets, let's just walk through this. You're going to have some product images. You're going to have a logo, some icons, colors, and the fonts that we're using. You can also see where these assets were sourced from. So for example, these profile images were sourced from unsplash.com. Logo was quickly made by me, colors were picked by me, and then we have the icons that were picked from iconfinder.com. And the font enter usually comes out of a box from Figma, or you could download it from Google Fonts. I'll leave a link to that down below as well. I've also created text styles and color styles over here, just so that we could save a little bit of time when we're applying typography and color. Once you're ready, come down to the finished file area and follow along. All right, first things first. One of the easiest things to make with auto layouts are buttons. Now, how do you create a button? There are two different ways. I'm going to zoom in here. One is you can start with text. So just come up here, select text, and just type button. I'm going to go to my styles and make sure that this is on button. Perfect. And I'm going to duplicate this just so that I can show you guys both ways. Way number one is to just create a separate rectangle. So I'm going to press R on my keyboard, draw a rectangle, drag it over here, place it underneath the button, select both. Either go to the right and find auto layout, press the plus button over here, or press Shift A on your keyboard. Either of the two will work. So when I do this, it automatically creates a auto layout frame. And you can see the UI also changes over here as well. We're going to go through and explain everything within this UI. When you have a simple button like this, where it's just a foreground and a background, foreground being the typography, background being the button, you can completely ignore this and this. We'll come back to this when we explore some more complex elements. However, these two guys are important. These are basically the padding around your button. Now, what do I mean by padding? Padding is basically the space that you have on the sides. So in this case, I have my text, which as you can see, it has its own bounding box. When I select this, you can see as I hover over these sections, the padding gets highlighted. There are a few different ways to modify the padding or set the padding on elements when you use auto layout. One way is to just come over here. This accounts for the padding left and right, and this accounts for top and bottom. So for example, I could have a padding of left and right of 24, top and bottom of 16, and you can see how that sets those for me. Another way is for me to just come over to my auto layout, select it, and click once my mouse icon changes and increase or decrease the padding individually like that. I could select the button, come over here, select the padding, and then it brings up the number box, and I could just enter a value over here and press enter, and it does that. Command Z to go back to it. Or I could come over here, set independent padding. So if I wanted to, on the left, I could have 16. On the right, I could have 8. On the top, I could have 12, and bottom, I could have 2 if I really wanted to. And that sets individual paddings. And another way, I'm just going to undo all that, come over here. Let's say that I wanted to have equal padding all around. So instead of me going over here and go 16 and 16, which you could absolutely do, there's nothing wrong with that. What you could do is to select your auto layout item, come over here onto either of these guys, hold down Command or Control and click. And now you can set equal padding for the whole lot. and I want a padding of 16. Now I'm going to delete this. Another way to create a simple button is to come over here, select your text, and I'm going to press Shift A on my keyboard in order to activate the auto layout. You can see the auto layout is now activated. I could go down here and find fill. I can add a fill to this. I'm going to set the fill color to my neutral 0, and I'm going to select the text by holding down Command on my keyboard and selecting the text. You could also just select it from the layers panel, and I'm going to change the color to neutral 1000. And now you can see that this is button. I'm going to change the border radius to 4, and I'm going to go back here and select all my paddings, and I want to set them equally to be 16 all around. And I want to change the text from button to get started. We now have the button to work with. Now that we got a button, let's go ahead and build the rest of our nav. So within the assets, I've provided the logo for the nav. So go ahead and select that, press Command C on your keyboard, come back to the finished file, paste your asset down here. Next, we're going to do the links. So the way that the links are working, I have a link number. So we're going to start with 01. My first link is going to be products. Let's just make sure that they have the correct dedicated text. My bottom link is going to be nav large, and the number is going to be nav medium. What I want to do is to basically group these guys together and then create a whole bunch of navs, align them equally in a way where if I was to remove this nav, these guys over here would automatically readjust. So in order to do that, I'm going to delete all these guys. I'm going to need to create two separate auto layouts. The first one's going to be the actual nav link. So I'm going to select both of my texts. I'm going to make this one neutral 0, and I'm going to make this one neutral 600, and then I'm going to select both and press Command A on my keyboard, or you could go up here and just press the plus on auto layout. Either will work. So going back over here, remember how before I said the rest of these are for a little bit more complex layouts? So let's go through them now. The first item over here is the direction of which my auto layout is oriented. What I mean by that is, at the moment, it's vertically stacked on top of each other. However, if I wanted the products to go next to the nav, I'll just select horizontal, and automatically the products now belongs next to the nav. If I wanted to replace the position of products and the number, I could simply select products. I'm holding down Command and select the actual product, and on my keyboard I can just press the arrow key. So like if I press left, they automatically swap positions. If I press right, they'll also do that. If I was to have them in a vertical direction, I could do the same thing. I'm just going to Command and click products, and if I select top, it's just going to swap its position with the number. Another way that you could do that is underneath frame, you can see number 1 is at the bottom. This actually matters. I could just come over here and in the same way, just press up on my keyboard and it does the same thing. So the way that you sort your layers actually matters in auto layout. In order to provide a better name for these guys, I'm going to rename this to button, and I'm going to rename this to nav link. Perfect. Now this guy over here is the spacing between my items. What does that mean? It means at the moment, if I was to select product and hold down Alt or Option on my keyboard, when I hover over number 1, I can see the space between them. At the moment, it's 17. I want that spacing to be 8. So I'm going to come over here and press 8, and you can see the space between them is now changed. The next thing that I want to do, these guys are not going to have any paddings. I want to show you guys how this works as well. At the moment, I can show you how the alignment left, center, or right works. And then later, when we do more complex items, we'll show you how the center or bottom alignments and top alignments would work as well. And then there are further things down here, but again, we'll show you all of these as we get to them. So if I was to go center, the two texts over here are now centered to each other. And if I was to align it to the right, the two texts are now aligned to the right of each other. So if I was to change anything over here, the texts are forever aligned to the right of each other. I'm going to Command Z and just go back to align left. And I'm going to come up over here and make 3 more copies of this. The next one's going to be number 2. Then 3, then 4. Then the next thing that I want to do, the left-hand side of my navigation, I want all of these guys to be horizontally aligned to each other, but at the same time to have the same spacing between them. And I want that spacing to be at 80. So all I have to do is to just select everything that I want to create an auto layout out of, press Command A on my keyboard, and now I've created another auto layout. I'm going to call the group nav left, and I'm going to come down over here, increase the spacing between my items to 80. And just like that, I have a consistent 80 spacing between all of my items. Then I'm going to come over here and change products to about, and you can see as I do that, it automatically keeps the spacing between the items over here. I'm going to do the same thing with my second link and the fourth link, sorry, the third link and the fourth link. I'm just gonna increase the size of my logo in order to explain another point about auto layouts. I'm going to change this to 85 for now. Coming back to the alignment tools, remember how I said there are top, middle, and bottom align? Well, basically, at the moment, as you can see, everything's aligned to each other at the top left. If I wanted everything to be centered to each other, then I can select the centered align left, and now everything's aligned to the center of each other. And if I go bottom, then everything gets aligned to the bottom of each other. So I'm going to Command Z this to go back to what we had previously. And I just wanted to sort of showcase that point as well. We'll explain the rest a little bit later in this tutorial. So I'm going to leave that there, and I'm going to start working on the right hand side of my navigation now. With the right hand side, I'm going to go back to my assets, and I'm going to grab these three icons over here, copy them and paste them over here. And the way that I'm going to work with these guys, so I've already converted them all to auto layout with an equal padding of 14 all around. I'm just going to add a background to them. So I'm going to go down to fill, and I'm going to change this color to neutral 800. And you can see that they have this very subtle gray background now. I'm going to come over here and change the border radius on these guys to 48 in order to create a circle. And I'm going to make sure that these are aligned to the center of the center. And what that means basically is, I'm just going to copy this to demonstrate this. If I was to resize this, you can see the icon stays in the center at all times. And if I was to like change this, then the position of the icon changes as well. This will come in handy later on as well when we create our dialog. Stay tuned for that. So the next thing that I want to do is for my notifications icon in the center over here, I want to add a notification indicator. That's quite easy to do. I'm just going to come over here and select ellipse, or you could just press O on your keyboard, and then I'm going to draw a circle that is 14 by 14 in width and height. I'm going to change its color to primary, and in order to add this on top of this auto layout, at the moment if I was to just add it in there, it automatically wants to drop it within the layout itself, which means that, as you can see within the blue highlights, it's going to get dropped next to my notification icon. However, I want this to be on top of the notification up here. In order to do that, Figma has introduced this new thing called absolute positioning, which is right up over here. And basically what it does, it removes this layer so that it's still a part of my auto layout over here. However, I am free to basically move it anywhere within the auto layout itself. So I'm going to use the alignment tool up here, and I'm going to align to the right and align to the top to make sure it's at the very corner of my component. And Figma automatically sets its constraints to be on the top and right. And I'm just going to copy these just to show you why that top and right is important. So at the moment, because it's stuck to the top and right, if I was to resize this, the icon still stays to the top and right. However, if this was, for example, to the left and right, things wouldn't work as expected. Just bear that in mind when you're playing around with the absolute positioning. Now I have all of my icons ready to go. I'm just going to select all of them and make it auto layout out of these guys by pressing Shift A on my keyboard. And I want the space between them to be at 32. So perfect, they already are there. And then I'm going to do this one more time with my button as well. So I'm going to select everything again and press Shift A to create another auto layout out of all these. Now this is great because if I was to, for example, come over here and either hide or delete one of these icons, they automatically resize. I also want the space between these guys to be 32. Actually, let's do this one this way. Just change this to 32. I just clicked it. I'm just going to change the name of this to nav right, and I'm going to change the name of this auto layout to icons. And we are now good to go. We can now go ahead and complete the rest of this navigation. So in order to create a navigation, I want a few things to happen. So first of all, we're just going to create a simple navigation. And in order for you guys to see what's actually happening, I'm going to change the background color of home for a second to 444. Zoom in here. In order to create a nav, I want to create a certain padding around the nav, and I want the nav to be responsive. So when I resize it, these guys automatically move around. And in order to do that, I'm just going to select everything and press Command A on my keyboard. Make sure that these are center aligned. I'm going to add a fill to the whole nav because I want the background color of the nav to just be black, which is our neutral 1000. And then now we're going to add padding to the rest of our nav. And in order to do that, I'm going to provide a padding of 24 top and bottom. and 64 left and right. And just like this, we have our nav. But one more thing that I want to do is, as I move this nav, I want everything to basically resize itself. So I want the right side of the nav to stick to the right side and the left side to stick to the left side. So in order to do that, that's quite simple as well. I'm going to select my nav, come over here. I'm going to clear this spacing between these guys. So I'm going to make that 0 because at the moment that's how they're spaced out. Come over here to advanced settings, come down here and select spacing mode and select space between. What this does, it now doesn't really care how much spacing I have between these two guys because that's automatically calculated. But what it does is, as I move this and make it bigger, the spacing over here automatically resizes itself as well. And if you have a look inside the nav itself, let's go ahead and rename this to nav. I have nav left and nav right. It basically does its best to automatically calculate the spacing between these guys based on the amount of space that I need this to be at. So for example, I could basically make this as large as my screen if I wanted to, move it to the top, come back to home and change the background color to 000, and I now have this nav. So for example, if you had a grid system, I'm just pressing Command G on my keyboard in order to bring a grid system that I've created up. You can resize this to the boundaries of a grid system and you have yourself a nav like this. This isn't how a grid system usually works, but I'm just showcasing it to demonstrate how you guys could potentially align your auto layouts once you're done with them. And it's relatively responsive at the moment. Obviously it doesn't fully respond to this, but we could also do that if we wanted to, but that's a little bit too advanced. We might get to that in a different tutorial. Cool, let's move on to the next bit. Another new feature in Figma's auto layout are stacking, and let me just show you guys how that could work. First, I'm going to go ahead and create a circle. I usually create my circles with rectangles and just add border radius. So this one's going to be 48 by 48 and border radius of, well, 32 would work, but you could just chuck it on 48 just to make sure that you can grow a little bit bigger if you needed to. Then I'm going to go ahead into the assets, grab all of these faces, copy them, bring them onto this page. And on Figma, there is a feature where you can copy properties of something. If I go ahead and right click on this photo and go copy or paste as, copy properties, as you can see, the shortcut for that is Command Option C, and then paste for that is Command Option V. But if I go ahead and copy properties, come onto my circle, right click and go paste properties, it pastes that image onto the shape that I had over here. But because of the fact that this has sharp corners, it's also going to bring that property over. So I'll just have to go back and redo my corners just like this. You can also see the image at the moment is not fully centered. I'll just have to hold Option on Mac. I believe it's Alt on Windows. Double click it and then you get the image crop activated. Or you could just click on this, go to image, make sure that you're on crop, and then you could start fiddling with this and placing it in the right spot. And then I'm also going to give this a stroke of 2 pixels. Eventually for the color, we're going to be using neutral 800, but for demonstrations, I'm going to use the red just so that you guys can see better. And I'm just going to go ahead and do this for all of these images. I'm going to fast forward this though. Cool. Once we have this going, we can go ahead and delete all these images. We don't need them anymore. Now, what I want to do is to stack these images on top of each other. So it's going to look something like this. And that's going to look like a bunch of profile images. It's quite simple, actually. I'm just going to Command Z back to how they were before. And what we're going to do, we're going to create an auto layout out of these guys. So either click here or press Shift A on your keyboard. You have yourself an auto layout frame. Let's call these profiles. And on auto layouts, you could use the space between items in order to give a positive value, or when you give it a negative value, then things can fall on top of each other. So I'm going to go ahead and give this a negative 16 pixels. However, I want the first image to be on top, and then I want them to basically stack in the opposite direction of this. In order to do that, I could just come over here to advanced layout settings, go down where it says canvas stacking, tap this, and then just select first on top. As soon as you do that, the first item would be on top, and then so on and so forth for the rest of the items. So you can see the first item within my layers is now on top, followed by second, third, fourth, and fifth. As we said, the reverse of that, the first would be number 5 all the way down to rectangle 1. I'm also going to make sure that these guys are always left aligned and centered to each other. And we have ourselves our profile stacking. I'm just going to select all of my rectangles, press Command R and rename all of them to profile, as in it's single rather than plural. There we go. And just like this, we have all of our profiles ready to go. Now, another cool thing about auto layouts is that, let's just say I want to add these profile images up here to my navigation, and I want to create a signed in and signed out states of my navigation. And in order to do that, it's quite simple, really. I can either Command X to cut it and select this one in particular and Command V it, and it's just going to paste it in there. Or I'm just going to Command Z. I could just drag it and drop it wherever that I want. And you can see the blue line appears to indicate where this will be dropped in. So for example, over here, it's going to drop it between my icons and the button. Cool. What I want to do is to just leave it over here. However, I'm going to go ahead and hide this. And all of a sudden you have this. And if this was like, for example, a logged in version of this, the CTA could be settings, view profiles, or anything else that you want it to be. And all of a sudden you have two different states of the same nav. Doing something like this would be very useful when you're creating components, but we'll get into components in the next video. I'm going to go down here and hide profiles and change this back to get started, and we are now good to go. I could show and hide my profile, and you can see the whole thing just resizes itself. And now we can move on to the next piece of auto layouts. Another good one to go through are lists. So let's say, for example, one of our sections over here has a drop-down menu, and that requires building some sort of a list. And the way that we're going to do that is relatively simple as well. So going back to assets, this time I'm going to grab the arrow right icon. I'm going to copy it, paste it over here. Just type in item 2, make sure body small is selected for that. Come down here to colors and select neutral 0. Make sure that this one has the same color, neutral 0. Perfect. Then I'm going to select the two items, press Shift A or auto layout. Down here, I just created my layout. Make sure they are centered, aligned to each other. Make sure my text is on hug, and make sure that my icon is fixed width and fixed height, or horizontal or vertical resizing. Now these guys have a 73 spacing between them. I want that spacing to be 8, like this. And I'm going to drag this up here so you guys can see what's happening as well. I'm going to rename this to list item, change it to item 1. This is ready to go, but what I want to do is to create a list out of these guys. So that's quite easy to do as well. So I'm going to copy this. I'm holding down Option and dragging it to the bottom. I want to make sure that they have a 16 pixel space between them. And I'm going to press Command D to redo that action 4 more times. Then I'm going to select all of my list items and press Shift A to create another auto layout. I'm going to rename this to list. And now I want to do a couple of more things. First of all, I want to give this list a background fill color. So I'm going to press fill. I'm going to make sure that the color is on neutral 1000. Then I'm going to give it a stroke or border. I'm going to make sure that the stroke is at 800. I'm going to make sure that it's 2 pixels. You can't really see this. Let me just change the color so you guys can quickly see this. That's where the stroke is at right now. We'll change it back to 800 in just a sec. Then I want to give this list 2 more things. First of all, we're going to change the border radius to 4 pixels so that it has smoother borders. And then I'm going to give it a horizontal padding, so left and right padding of 24, like this. I'm going to zoom out so you guys can see it better. And then a top and bottom padding of 16. Like this. This list is going to get a little bit more complicated because what I want to do is to make sure that this list can actually get resized like this. I want the arrow to stick to the far right, and I want the actual text to stick to the far left. And then I want the spacing between these guys to automatically get calculated based on the total width of my list. So I'm going to Command Z that, and I'm going to show you guys a few things over here. So first things first, I'm going to change the border color back to neutral 800. I'm going to Command X to cut this, zoom out, select home, Command V to paste it here. The first thing to do in order to make the width of this manual or fixed is to simply come up to horizontal resizing, press it, and select fixed. Then I'm going to go over here. I want the total width of my list to be 210 pixels. So I'm going to type it, but we do have a few problems. So I'm going to go ahead and rename this to item 2. As you can see, one of the issues that we have is these arrows don't line up. So I want all the arrows to line up to the right component, and that's quite easy to do really. So I'm just going to come down here, collapse all these, and select all of my lists. I'm basically selecting a list at the bottom, holding down shift, and then selecting the list at the top, and it automatically selects all of them. Then at the moment, the horizontal resizing is on hug. What hug does is that it basically takes as much space as my item needs. So for example, if I was to change this to something else, the list resizes and takes as much space as it needs. I'm going to Command Z that. So instead of doing that, I'm going to select all of my list items. Make sure that you're on the actual list item, not on anything within the list item, and change horizontal resizing to fill container. What that does now, as you can see, it looks for the padding that you provided for your list component, which at the moment it's 24 and 24 right there and there. And then it basically takes the entire space that's available to it within that padding. So if I was to select every one of these guys over here, you can see they're now the same width. However, the reason why they're not aligning yet is because you're going to have to do one more thing. You're going to have to go inside the actual list between the arrow icon and the list item. I know that my arrow icon, I want the width and height to always be fixed. So I want me to be able to control these. So I'm going to leave those as they are. However, with my item, I want the item to take as much space that's available to it as well. And that way, this is going to push back the arrow to the far right. So I'm going to come over here and change this from hug to fill container as well. And what that does, and you can see the arrow actually over here indicates that for you guys. When I go fill container, it's going to take as much space as it has available to it. I'm going to press fill container, and just like that, you can see the bounding box for my item 1 is as much space as it can possibly take, plus the 8 pixel spacing that we provided there, right? So if I was to change this 8 pixels to like 16 pixels, for example, you can see now there is a bigger gap and this has less room to grow. So I'm going to change back this to 8, and I'm going to show you guys what happens if you continuously type over here, item 1, something long, and it basically drops the rest of the text to the second line because it goes over the bounding box. But one more thing, because of the fact that this is aligned to the left and then center, the icon gets automatically centered to my text. Great, so I'm going to repeat the same thing with everything else. So I'm going to hold down Command and select my other item, and I'm going to hold down Command and Shift at the same time to select more than one item. I'm going to select all of the text, come to hug, make them all to be fill. Great, now my list item is on fill, my text is on fill, and my icon is on fixed. And what this means is I now have a responsive component, and as I resize it, the bounding box for the text also resizes automatically. Cool. I'm gonna drop this back down to 210, and perhaps this could be a drop down, for example, for your menu. Another thing that I want to show you guys, I can very easily make this into a horizontal box, but there is a small caveat to this that I have to fix. So let's go over here and change the direction of my list items to horizontal, and you can see the bounding box is quite massive because at the moment the height is on fixed because it basically swaps the width and height. So I have to put my width on fixed and height on hug, and that basically fixes the issue that I had. All right, I'm going to Command Z back to my list being vertical. There we go. We have our vertical list, and let's move on to the last piece of this tutorial. All right, the final one. Let's build out dialog. This one's possibly one of the more complicated ones because it's going to take almost everything that we've learned and apply it to this dialog. So first, let's go to the assets, grab our icon, paste it over here, and let's just go and put together the base of our dialog. So first, we're going to need a heading. Then we're going to need our body or paragraph. I'm going to change this from body small to subtitle medium. And I'm going to change this from body small to body medium. This one's just going to take lorem ipsum text. It's going to have the feedback text color, and this one's going to stay at our neutral 0. So the first thing that I want to do, I want to build this section, and then this is going to be individual to this. So quite easily, I can come over here, select the 2 items, press Shift A to create my auto layout. That's going to be my content. Title of the content goes here. And then I'm going to resize this for now. So I'm going to change these to fixed And at the moment, if I was to resize this, it's not going to work great because this guy is on hug content. So it prioritizes hugging around the content. Same as this guy. So if I want this to fix itself against the parent's bounding box, parents being the other auto layout that we just made, I'll just have to change its horizontal resizing to fill container. So it's just going to take as much space as its bounding box allows, like this. I'm going to do the same with this. I'm going to change this from hug to fill. And both of these guys are now kind of responsive, as you can see. Next, I'm going to add this here. So I'm going to select both of my icon and my content and press Shift A to create another auto layout, and I'm going to rename this to top. The space between these guys at the moment is 22. I'm going to change this to 16. Great. And I'm going to change the color of the icon to feedback primary. We're almost there. Then I'm going to adjust the size of these guys. I forgot to do that. Sorry, just change that from 12 to 8. Then we're going to need our buttons down here. We've already done this before, so I'm going to go a little bit quicker here. We're going to have an accept, and I'm going to change the font to button medium, Shift A to create an auto layout out of it, change the color to neutral 1000, add a fill to it, make sure the fill is feedback primary, add a border radius of 4 pixels, and then set the padding left and right to 16, and top and bottom we're going to leave it as 8. And I'm going to duplicate this and then dragging it out here, and we're just going to make the reverse of this button. So we're going to give it a stroke. We're going to leave it at 1 pixel and then just change the color of the stroke to the primary color. This is inside, so you can't really see it yet until we come up here and remove our fill color. Then I just need to select the text, change that from neutral 1000 to feedback primary, change that to cancel. Then I'm going to go ahead and rename both of these to button, and then I'm going to select both and make an auto layout out of these two and give them a spacing of 16 pixels between. The next thing that I want to do is to create an auto layout out of all of these guys. So I'm going to select everything, and I do want them to align to the top, but I want them to align to the top right. And what that does, it just basically forces both of my buttons to always be right aligned to the bounding box. In order to complete this though, I'm going to make sure that my dialog, I'm going to rename it to that, is selected. Actually, I'm going to rename this to CTAs, so call to actions. I'm going to give this a fill, change it to feedback background, and you get this very subtle, very, very dark yellow background. And then my box is going to have an equal spacing. So I'm going to hold down Command and click into my paddings, change this to 24. Then I'm going to select the full dialog. I'm going to give it a 1 pixel stroke of the primary color. Come up here and change this to 4 pixels. And we're almost done. We just have to do one more thing because at the moment this isn't responsive. So like even though this was responsive, let me just show you what I mean by this. When this is outside of the container, because it has nothing to fill, right? This is the parent container. You're not going to see the fill option over here. You only see the fixed width, which I set, or you're going to get the hug content, which it automatically tries to hug what it has. So I'm just going to come down here and select this, but over here it now has the fill container because it has the bounding box around it to try to fill. So I'm going to change this to fill container. That hasn't really fixed it yet because if I do this, it still doesn't resize. So this is unfilled. So the problem is we're going to double click and just see where the problem's at. You can see the content itself has changed to a fixed width. We're going to change this to fill container as well. And now we're going to select the bounding box and change the bounding box to fixed width. And by doing that, you now have yourself a fully responsive dialog. All you have to do is just make sure that everything that you got within here is set onto fill. And that's just going to fill the container like this and this. Everything's on fill. Great. This one over here, however, can stay on hug because we basically just needed to hug as many buttons as we're going to add onto it. So like later on, if for whatever reason you were going to have 3 buttons over here, you could, and you could just delete one of them and it automatically resizes itself. The final size for this, I'm just going to leave it at 420. And there you go. We have all of our components that we just built within our auto layouts. Alright, that's it for this video. Thank you so much for watching. I hope that you guys found it useful. Another thing that I wanted to say is thank you so much for almost 2,000 subscribers in such a short time and with so few videos. I really appreciate your support, and I'm definitely working on more videos, so don't forget to like and subscribe. And that's it. Good seeing you guys. See you next time.